We went through Porirua, Christchurch, Hastings, Mangele, Takanini, Papakura. So right throughout all those different visits through both not just our budget breakfasts, but also our talanoa with Pacific providers. The very key things that keep coming through is, making sure that the cost of living is addressed for our people. So explaining to our people where we think inflation is going, especially with the Reserve Bank, who's come out with the monetary policy statement confirming that he thinks that the inflation is going to be coming down. We also had a lot of requests from our people about we want to have a group that helps address our Pacific needs in our area, especially in the regions. So they were asking for how do we do that? How do we become a group that can access the funding that you're talking about that you're giving us through budget? So a lot of discussion around that right throughout the country. So for me as the minister, I take that away for my officials from the Ministry of Pacific Peoples to start working on how we can build that Pacific capability for our organisations, especially the smaller ones who might not be the bigger organised entities or companies. So that had come through quite strongly throughout the budget roadshow.
E mawhaiona e whaalawa I te le talanoa, lea ia matulanga sa mawhaiona e whaasoa mawhisosoani atuai I whesilia sa whesilingi ai oi. So with these concerns, what were you able to share with our people who were able to be at this event?
So what's been interesting about Budget 23 is that there's an additional 51 million, so that's new money, on top of 683 million that's been secured over the last 5 years. Now, each budget, there is money that's carried over from the last budget. So if I look at this financial year for Pacific Peoples, over 70% of that is going to be going out to Pacific communities. So one of the budget initiatives we have is the Community Wellbeing Resilience Fund. Now that particular fund helps community groups gear up their Pacific community for, say, natural events, natural disasters, like we saw with the King's Church in Napier, who did an amazing job during Cyclone Gabrielle. And we saw a number of our groups who were part of the evacuation centres in South Auckland. So that funding is for community groups. So what I need to do with my team is to work through the criteria as to how we make it accessible so that you don't have to be, again, a large company that's already delivering Pacific services, that our smaller groups like churches, etc., can access that funding. Also for the cost of living, talking through what the prescription fees, the removal of prescription fees means, because that removal of prescription fees came through a Pacific study through the University of Otago. So really showing how much influence our Pacific people are having on the wider budget as well.
Thank you for elaborating on this, Honourable Barbara Edmonds. Now, lea sa e talanoa I le paketi fo'i, the 51 million, lea ua whaopopo I le fisosoani lea a le malo mo tangata Pasifika. E mawhaiona e whalawa I tele awa o le sifasili lea, it was the access and funding o le avanoa. Now, tele o tangata lea o lo o manana o ina ia maua le avanoa e maua mai e le tupe po le se leni lea, the funding. But sometimes there's a lot of not only red tape, but also, filling out the applications and the form can be such a long and dragged process. O se tasi o tūlanga ia o le ama whaiona wa ai ei, lau a whionga fo ia mesi o le tō team. Will this be one area that you will be looking at as well?
Yes, so that's one area I want to make easier for our communities. I mean, I know what it's like to apply for funding. I've been in community organisations and had to do grant funding and funding to government organisations. It can be difficult. We also have to balance as well, though, is that every taxpayer dollar in New Zealand has to be accounted for, which is why there are contracts for service. But it doesn't mean that we should prevent the smaller organisations having access to that. So I'm working with our team in relation to that, and that was the number one thing I set the task for them, is that when we get back to Wellington, down, that we work through that criteria, and we work on how we can make it much more easily accessible to our communities.
So good, especially the ones who are just starting out as well, that have nothing to fall back on or have nothing to prove, to be able to access these funding. So that'll be such a great help, Honourable Barbara Edmonds. Now, lesi vaenga le tātalanoanga, the housing register. Now, the number of people on the wait list is this year, currently, 24,081. Se 15% o le numera lea, 15% of that number are Pacific people. E mawhaiona e whaamatala, why are a large number of our people being represented in this number?
Yeah, so it's our Pacific and families and communities have always been disproportionately impacted by New Zealand's housing environment for decades. It's not something new. So I'm under no illusion there's no easy fix for this other than to build more houses. So that's effectively what we need to do. But on top of that, what we need to do is also look at how we support our families to get into their own homes. So there's a couple of things that we need to do there. We've got a Pacific Financial Capability Development Program that's run right throughout the different parts of the country. We've got 15 providers who are contracted to do that, and around 2,000 Pacific people have enrolled. Through that, 80 families have bought their first home. So that's important, being able to them how they can save for the deposit, how they can apply for mortgages, just that financial capability. Because of that program as well, 23 families have prevented the loss of their homes. So what it shows is that it's actually working, being able to develop these programs. And that's, again, money through the budget that comes through. There's also 725 Pacific households through the Pacific People's Pathway to Home Ownership that's being run through the Retirement Commission program. Again, another really good program that helps our people into their own homes. The other thing that we need to do is when we build these houses, we need to make sure they're appropriate for our Pacific families. They have to be for Pacific by Pacific because we live intergenerationally. I lived with my grandparents and my parents.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what we have to do is that we're trying to bring through community housing providers. So the community housing providers are contracted by the government to build houses. We've got a number of them right throughout the country, but we only have one Pacific provider, and that's Lepanina, which is up in Auckland. So we are now in the process of bringing through another 6 community housing providers, including one here in Porirua in my hometown, and they're building houses as part of our whare. But last year in November, we have to have a plan around this. So last year in November, we launched Whale Mo'ainga, the Pacific Housing Strategy. It just shows the plan that we need to undertake as a government to increase Pacific households buying their own homes, getting them off the waiting list. And then on the other side, yes, we do have a high wait list in general, and I'm not happy with the disproportionate number of Pacific people that are on there, but there's no easy fix to it other than providing and building more homes, that either social housing or homes for our families.
So building homes is going to be a long-term solution for our families, but those who are in need today, is there anything else that they are able to reach out to? And also with these programs, actually, I'll stick with that question, please, Honourable Barbara. Yeah. So is there a short-term fix for them?
If we're on the waiting list, if there is no home, you can't get into it. There is no short-term fix for this. So what's happened since the government's come into government 5 years ago, 1 in 7 social house has been built by this government in 5 years. And that's since the 1930s. So that's quite remarkable. The number of consents has gone up under this government, which means that people have the intention to build. So there's no short-term fix for this. We can't put people back into cars, so that's why a number of them who are in emergency housing are being housed through hotels and motels. That's not ideal. I absolutely acknowledge that. Yeah. And the same thing in the sense that when you are in social housing wait list, unless we have social housing available and built, We can't put you into a house. So it's not ideal. And I'm totally not going to run away from that. But we need to build more, and building more Pacific capability in this space is one way we can make sure that the houses we build are suitable for our families.
With these programs and initiatives to get our families into their own homes, is there a certain criteria that a family needs to meet in order to have access to these programs?
Yeah, so it all depends on what the community housing provider, some of the criteria that's agreed to. Generally, you have to be of low income. If you're looking into buying a home, we have to help the families how they can meet the bank's criteria, because it's not criteria set by the government, it's a criteria set through the bank. But that's why we also have the progressive home loan, home ownership scheme, where the government does provide some funding towards that and support for people to get into progressive home ownership. So there are different criteria, but the generally it's for our lower income families, which of course is disproportionately again our Pacific families.
Yeah, so especially the families that do not fall into this criteria and who are asking for help, is there another program or initiative, or how can they get help?
Yeah, so again, the Pacific Financial Capability Development Program is the area that they need to kind of link up to. There's a number of different providers again across the country. I'm happy to send a link through to Radio Samoa so our families know where they can go to and go onto your website, because it really is, they need to partner with these program leads to figure out what they can do within their own means in order to access the different help available for them.
Ma loa whamtei sau noa I lea vaenga lawa whionga Honourable Barbara Edmonds. Now, it's Samoa Language Week in New Zealand. Lewa yaso lo whaatawa nei le tangangana. How has it been for you, Minister?
It's, what I've really noticed this, Vaiaso Nana Samoa, I've really noticed that there's been a lot of celebrations.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just me, I'm more aware of it, but right throughout the country and not just in our Samoan community, I'm really seeing, New Zealand-based organisations really embracing it. I'm seeing a number of the public sector organisations embracing it. So for me, it's been a really uplifting week to see it, even in Parliament. We've had community group come into Parliament, walk our speaker into the house singing Lota Nu'u. It's been an amazing week of celebration. I'm looking with jealousy at Tawai in Samoa and watching him at the independence celebrations. Yeah, we both are. But for me, it's always a yearly reminder for me to, hey, don't forget to keep trying to speak Samoan where I can.
Money.
And it's a journey for me, as a first generation New Zealand born Samoan woman. It's when I'm surrounded by English all day, it's really hard for me to make sure I'm intentionally looking into where I can raise my nganana Samoa. So whether that's listening to Radio Samoa in the morning or being with our e whakasa congregational churches here in Porirua, who, their whole services in Samoan. It's a really good reminder for me that the journey for me is a lifelong one, and one that I need to keep, trying to achieve.
Malia. Malo saunoa. Yesi si vainga e te fia saunoa yei le mai e ta whaatalonoanga nei tai au.
I think for everyone, happy Samoan Independence Day for yesterday. Manuia le vaiaso in Nanana Samoa. We still have 2 days. Let's celebrate for 2 more days.
Of course, this is our week.
This is our week, yep, and the rest of the country celebrates it with us. So, whaftai te lava mo le awanoa.
Whaftai lava mo le whaawanoa ino lo teimi I awale ta sota inga I le nei tai au. Ia manuia lavanga luenga ma lava singa I lawa whionga I le Minister.
Tai lava.